would like to welcome Mr. Mark Bernstein, former CEO of Palo Alto Research Center Incorporated. It's called PARC. It used to be known Xerox. I'm sure you know this name. It's very popular. Mr. Bernstein received a BS in Mechanical Engineering from University of Colorado in 1973 and an MBA from College of Notre Dame in 1991. He joined the General Sciences Laboratory of PARC in 1979 as a researcher with background in semiconductor and product design. Mr. Bernstein then went on to work in PARC's Joint Venture Spectra Diode Laboratory, which merged with GDS Uniphase. Mr. Bernstein became president and center director for Xerox PARC in December 2001. Then he served as the chief executive officer when its name changed to Palo Alto Research Center Incorporated PARC in 2002 and led the center until his retirement in January 2011. During his time as a CEO, Bernstein led the transition of Xerox Research Center, famous for its inventions of the computer, mouse, Ethernet, and the laser printer, into an independent subsidiary. I'm sure, he will talk more about really Xerox or PARC and the innovation they really made all these years. May not heard about it, but so many companies, they took advantage of that. So basically the underlying invention is mainly from PARC. Let me welcome Bernstein here.
What I'd really like to talk about is really what I see as the opportunity for innovation out in the world today. There's a lot going on in the world, a lot of change, and I want to talk with you about how I saw that from my experience at PARC when we became an independent subsidiary with the requirement to go out and make a business from research. It was transformational both for me and for a lot of the folks at PARC, certainly my senior team. So, and I do want to leave time for questions, and I'm also better at interacting than I am at talking, so if I confuse you, interrupt me. If I say something stupid, challenge me. I'd like for this to be of benefit to you all at the end of the day. So I'll talk a little bit about PARC, some changes that I see in the world that I know you all recognize, how I see the needs that are generated that are quite significant in the context of these changes. And I want to close really talking about innovative approaches to leadership. And part of what I want to communicate about leadership is that it's not being a CEO. It's about all of you, each of you, being connected from your values to the purpose that you want to express in the work that you do, and how important that is for you to really be a champion for that intention, because it's not going to happen to you. It needs to come from you. So as you go back, we just, I keep saying we, even though, but you can understand that. Last September, PARC celebrated its 40th anniversary in September, and it was really a great event. We had a couple hundred alumni that have been at PARC over the years all come back, and we talked about not only how innovation has changed in those 40 years, but we also got the chance to engage the alumni in a lot of the new work that we were doing, and outside of the traditional areas of Xerox and IT that many of them knew Xerox PARC for. But if you go back to the inception of Xerox PARC, it really was a very unique opportunity to start a research center with a charter as bold and as broad as creating the Office of the Future. Xerox doesn't get enough credit for really seeing what was starting to happen here in Silicon Valley in the late 60s, and really recognizing that something fundamental about how people dealt with information, how they were going to do work, was going to emerge from this confluence of semiconductors and systems and software. So with this bold charter, the challenge was for all of the researchers there to become the architects of information for the future. And so it built up over the first 3 or 4 years. Two of the things that I want to highlight here that I think are unique, aside from the charter, is that it was consciously multidisciplinary. So George Paik, when he started the research center, went out and looked for computer scientists and electronics engineers, electrical engineers, and computer scientists and physicists to all work together, and really looking to create a shared perspective from these multiple points of view of what the Office of the Future was going to be and how all of the different disciplines were going to help collaborate to bring all this into reality. And so that's what happened over the first 10 or 15 years. I got there in 1979, summer of 1979, a few months before Steve Jobs' famous visit there. But if you look at what, when people think about PARC, this is what they think about, this incredible breadth of what was a complete distributed computing environment, everything from bitmap displays and network workstations to mail servers, file servers, laser printers, and then all of the software, all the enabling software for editing and creating documents, as well as being able to manage communication over the network. So, really a very impressive list, and you see some of the pictures here of the first laser printer, which is called a Dover. It had a laser that was about yay big and about that big around. And when I came to PARC in 1979, my goal was to try and create semiconductor lasers yay big to replace that. And this was the size of a refrigerator on its side, and I don't have to tell you what it is now. But you see, this Xerox Star. This was Xerox's attempt to commercialize the Alto and the workstation. It was not successful, as you might imagine. A $25,000 workstation against what was in a $3,000 or $4,000 Macintosh was not equitable business value. But I think one of the things that's important to note here is the difficulty of whole research visions being adopted by, in this case, the parent company, Xerox. And, there was all of this collective vision embodied in the distributed computing environment, and Xerox did very well adopting laser printing. They got that. I mean, it was marks on paper. Okay, we get that. And so that was very quickly adopted and became, paid for PARC many times over in terms of profits. Multi-billion-dollar business very quickly. But the rest of the technology was really quite a challenge. And, as you go back and look at it, Ian Mulcahy and I used to joke that there wasn't a place we went to, and this is Ian retired in the middle of last year, but for 10 years there wasn't a place that either of us went to that somebody didn't raise their hand and said, how could you screw this up? And it really is quite obvious how this wasn't broadly successful. We didn't turn Xerox or PARC did not turn Xerox into a computer company, and there are a couple of good reasons for that, and I identify them here really in shortfalls of the leadership of both Xerox and PARC. Xerox had no idea what they were going to do with what they were asking for. Their ability to stay connected was really a shared shortfall between PARC leadership and Xerox leadership to really understand how they were going to be able to internalize this groundbreaking set of innovations and be able to change the nature of the company. There's always you'll experience this if you haven't already, but there are natural antibodies. Organization is like any organism. Human organism is exceptional, but any organism is resistant to things that are different. And so you'll always run into that. And the other very reasonable understanding that you have to have is that at that time, in the late 70s, Xerox businesses were very profitable. I mean, they were bringing in 15% after-tax profits, and the notion of being able to go take on this uncertain risk when they didn't have to, they weren't being forced to, there were simply no takers. On the other side, I think that there was really a shortfall on the part of PARC really being able to champion itself inside Xerox. And it really sought to be able to create what you would call today customer pull, and being able to put altos in the White House and all of that, and have people really be enthused about this whole distributed computing environment wasn't sufficient. And so this is a big challenge. I mean, you're all going to face this as you go out into the world, is that in order for technology to have an impact on the business, the value of what that technology means and the cost of adoption, it really has to be understood, and that's something I'm going to come back to. So, but if you think beyond the distributed computing environment that Xerox PARC is famous for, there really was a tremendous number of innovations that found their way into the world. Some of them, Xerox, you'll notice Microsoft was a very good customer for a lot of PARC technologies, from software to tablet computing. But there'll also be some familiar names that many of you will recognize of big companies here in Silicon Valley. The other thing to notice is the breadth of the technologies, from hardware to software and all spaces in between. So very, very significant impact in the world in terms of the commercial innovations. So this is a shift to PARC. So around, as was mentioned, around 2001, Xerox was going through a rather difficult financial period, and we're looking to be able to sell off assets to generate cash. And PARC was one of those assets that they weren't looking to sell. They were looking to bring in other investors to kind of share in the ownership of PARC, because Xerox still wanted what PARC was doing for them, but they couldn't take all of what PARC was generating. And the sensitivity around filming the future was the source of hoping that other people would want to come in. And we got very close. It took over about a year and a half. We were talking with a number of different interests. A very familiar microprocessor manufacturer here in the Valley and their software partner up in Washington were very interested. We had financial interests, intellectual property interests from the East Coast that were very interested. We had some companies from Japan and Korea that were also very interested. But at the end of the day, what Xerox was asking for and what the companies were willing to pay in 2001, 2002 time period, which some of you may remember. Yeah, that's about 11 years ago, so you should be able to remember that. There was the internet bubble burst around that time, and trying to sell technology was not the easiest thing in the world to do, as I discovered along with my cohorts. But be that as it may, after about a year and a half, 2 years, Ann Mulcahy and I sat down and said, look, we're burning out the researchers with dog and pony shows and out of balance with the research they need to be doing. So let's try and figure out a way to be able to develop a business model that'll help establish revenue streams coming into PARC, and we'll try and operate the part that Xerox doesn't support with a business model that reflects the independent subsidiary status that we had. So we went about doing that, and it was really a shock. I mean, we'd all grown up in the Xerox context, and as in most companies, marketing and sales kind of keep you from talking with customers. So there isn't this real engagement that you have with seeing the value of what you're creating valued by the end customer. So we had to quickly comprehend that, and that was difficult. I mean, just some companies in IT don't do research. Cisco's model is quite famous for really being able to let the venture community absorb a lot of the technology risk and wait for startups to actually generate something close to a product before they actually invest in it. So this notion of being able to invest in something that is going to take 3, 5, maybe even 10 years for real profits to return from revenue is a very difficult challenge, and different industries have very different sensibilities about what it means. The cultures are all very different. In some organization, research is front and center in terms of thinking about the strategic future of these companies, and in other cases, it's kind of relegated to the fruit seller, and they do their patents and they do their presentations, and the corporate officers put a checkbox by yes, we do research. But so there was all of this discovery that we had to go through. The alphabet soup of different acronyms in different industries was something that we had to deal with. This is an interesting one. I think that you can all relate to. Is that researchers, when as Xerox PARC was structured, where you have a parent that takes what it is you deliver, all too often, because you're so isolated from what it takes to actually get to a customer, you have this idea that all the hard work is in the concept. It's in the inception of the idea. That's where all the innovation occurs, and that's 80% of it. They're getting it to market. That's the easy part. And as you will all discover, and if you don't already know, in engineering, there is an 80-20 rule, but it's the reverse of what a lot of the researchers thought at that time. And the ability to be able to understand what it was going to take to be able to take a research prototype, a demonstration of technology that was quite powerful, and how it was actually going to become a product or a solution or a service is something that we had difficulty with. Suffice to say, we had to not only do a lot of the legwork to talk about how our technology was going to be adopted, but in many cases, we actually had to do business cases to show what the impact on the market for a particular customer was going to be based on this innovation that we were trying to get them to support. So if you look at our business model, it was what I just described, what we call client services, where we either had a prototype of something that we believed was important in their industry and in the markets they served, a client service where we go in and actually do consulting work, doing ethnographic studies of how people actually work with their products or how they worked internally around using technology to share information about solutions. A lot of really good work in that space. Work for the government, non-classified work, none of the dark, spook work that some folks in the Valley here do. And across a broad array of government agencies, we did everything from NIH looking at cancer cell detection to green lasers for the Army, looking at security protocols for the Navy, looking at information sifting for the CIA and NSA, although they didn't say that's what they were, but we knew that's what they were. After 9/11, there was a tremendous amount of information of different languages that had to be sifted, and so a lot of really good government work there too. When we were spun out, we were given our patent portfolio, and when we were spun out in 2002 forward, all the patents that we created were PARC patents. They were not Xerox patents; they were PARC patents. So when I left at the end of last year, we had a portfolio of about 2,500 active patents, and we'd done licensing deals with various companies and entities to generate over $100 million during the time I was there. So we also had a line of business around startups, creating new businesses, and we generated 2 or 3 startups that were funded. So collectively, that was the business model. We had money from Xerox, which paid, about a little right now it's a little less than half of what the overall budget was, and we would generate a profit that would come back to the PARC employees and be shared among us as incentive bonuses. But we had this very diverse business model that was intended to be able to span the different stages of research and technology that we had across a broad array of markets, from software to hardware, medical, clean tech, which I'll talk a little more about. But all of this was really comprehensive in service of trying to generate a business model that would prove that you could do research, world-class research, and still generate value from that and reinvest that in the research. So here's a, we can't be public about everything, but what you'll see here are some of the things that are public. And again, I want to stress the fact that it's across a very broad array of technologies and markets that we operated. I mentioned the startups. There was one that we incubated at PARC. It came in as two entrepreneurs that lunched with a couple of our researchers over at UC Merced, where a lot of the California solar research is funded. And there was a conference there. They had lunch, talked about what their idea was. Make a long story short, 3 months later, they were at PARC. 15 months after that, they were 60 people strong, and we had to kind of shoehorn them out of the building because they were growing too fast. They left with a $250 million valuation, set up shop in Mountain View. PowerSet's another startup that we had around natural language, being able to understand the meaning of phrases as opposed to just keyword associations and statistical understanding. This was really reflected about 30 years of research. I mean, and research like that is not going to be done anymore. I don't think, unless it's done in places like a university setting. So very important work, very great startup, got bought out by Microsoft, and we took in a significant amount of cash from the licenses to the software code that we generated, 60 plus patents that we had licensed to them, and the equity stake we had in the company for a lot of the work that we were doing, in addition to the client service work that we were doing. So also, when you look at some very established companies, DMP was probably the most interesting from my perspective, is that they're the largest printing company in the world, and they came to PARC with an interest of being able to take their strength, which was really the ability to be able to integrate information from multiple sources and be able to produce something unique. So their customized catalog back in the 90s was kind of a breakthrough in the early 90s, where they would be able to, based on who you are and what they knew about you, be able to customize things that would interest you and ship that. So they wanted to be able to take that competency, that asset, but be able to, rather than print it on paper and ship it out, to be able to push it out in what they called rich media, which is, as you all know now, this was about probably 8 years ago, is really pushing out video and interactive media to mobile handset users in Tokyo. Fujitsu, again, I mentioned ethnography. They had these vertical silos of solutions delivery organizations. That one was focused on government, one was focused on retail, one was focused on energy, and but they didn't talk to each other. I mean, you just had these silos of code, practice, insights, understanding that were really isolated. And so we helped them be able to share information, be able to think about going in and studying customers to give them what they need rather than responding to what they tell you they want. When we went in, they had no idea when they took on a job whether they were going to make money or not. And when they didn't make money, they lost a lot of money. So this was a big help for them. Sun, now Oracle, we have a stress metal process that is used for compliant interconnects for very high density computing. And that's something that they've brought to market this year. We're quite proud of. So anyway, just a flavor of the kinds of things we did as PARC. PARC Incorporated, separate from what we did for Xerox. A number of things we did for Xerox during this time frame that are also very important. If you look at Xerox's flagship high volume production printing press, and you look at the bit rate for full color and levels of gray, and we did both the video path and the machine control that actually looks at, where is, you get paper flying at, a couple feet per second, duplex, and it's going through all these handlers. Where's the paper and when do you start printing on it? So a lot of the constraint-based work that we had done was really brought to bear on that. So I'm not showing you what we did for Xerox, but that was significant. So this is a shift, obviously, and I want to talk about what I see from my experience as leader of PARC, and a lot of people at PARC had the same experiences. What did we take away from all this, and what do we think about the world? And the world is, and you can, you've all got hand devices right now. You can see what's going on in the world, and it's really quite remarkable the amount of change that you all have seen in your years is unprecedented, and it's going to accelerate. And so, how do you deal with this change? How do you respond to it in a way that really is different than the way it was responded to 50 years ago? Because if you look at 50 years ago, the way people dealt with change was really to, as I characterize it, just kind of when change happens, then we'll do something. It's totally reactive. So in addition to all this change, we have what people are referring to as peak everything. You're talking about world population, tripling in the last 50 years. You're talking about energy usage and the impact on the environment quadrupling. You're talking about the number of, this is just, this is January of '94 out to the end of last year, almost 1 billion internet host sites, over 2 trillion emails last year alone. You're looking at 2 billion daily users of the internet. Just incredible, unbelievable. And then here at home we have, particularly in the US, but this is a global issue that I'll talk about, is healthcare. And you look at, 20% of the country's gross domestic product spent just on healthcare. That's even worse than the debt in terms of the interest on the debt. So significant burden to how this country is going to prosper. So how do we go about thinking about the degree of change that's happening and the challenges that we face, the constraints that we face when we're at the edge of this cliff that we're being driven to in terms of reality? And these aren't deep insights. They're just what I want to try and do is get us all to kind of comprehend the degree of change that we're talking about as we start to talk about opportunity. The great thing about there being the end of cheap energy and the end of abundant resources is that it makes us think about what we do. And when you think about it, you can start thinking about alternatives rather than just continuing to do what you've done before. And anybody who's bought a gallon of gasoline over the last few months knows where we're headed. So this is an opportunity. It's an opportunity to think about, are there substitutes? Are there different approaches and alternatives to how we look at the world? We ain't seen nothing yet, right, in terms of information. It's the only thing that's gotten more abundant and cheaper, is the ability for us to be able to create and communicate information across the world. And then this notion that everybody's buzzing about the cloud. Well, it's really just about computational utility. It's about having it there whenever you want it, in whatever quantity you need, and it's just there, and it's always there. This is one, people don't, that was like, so 2 years ago, right, global warming. But the problem that we have here is that we're seeing the effects. And you look at the weather this past winter, different than anyone I recall, and I'm a lot older than all of you. There are going to be changes. There are going to be changes, and we're kind of uncertain as to what those changes are going to be, but they are coming. And so the problem is you've got this kind of 10-year lag effect, so anything you do today actually makes a difference, because of the transient in the ecosystem. But one thing I think we can count on is a persistent need to continually, as we talk about the first point there, reassess what it is we're doing and think about, from a global perspective, how do you go about making better choices about the things you do and the consequences of their impact on the environment. So no big deal there. Some of you are aware, at least in the U.S., there's this big baby boomer bubble that we'll talk about, but it's much worse in other countries. Europe is worse than the U.S., and Japan is a country that is going to be shrinking. It's going to lose about a third of its population over the next 25 years. Korea is in even worse shape. So you have all these different trends in different parts of the world, and the demographics are going to be irrefutable. So, and then where we are now, of course, is if you look at a lot of the governments are unable to afford to deal with the things that they need to do in order to address all the above. So my premise is there's opportunity. There's opportunity to innovate in all this change. And it really is, there's a recognition that change isn't going, you don't just sit there and kind of wait for it. I refer here, government is probably the slowest responder to change, even when it's abrupt and dramatic and disastrous. I mean, you look at Katrina as an example of government's inability to do what it's there for, which is to really serve the public well-being. Industries, they believe that industries have taken shape and they're there for all eternity. And, the people who were, making, buggies for horse-drawn carriages, if you'd asked people what, as Henry Ford said, if you'd asked them what they wanted, they would have said, faster horses. But, industries do go away. I mean, Xerox is facing that now in terms of the decrease in the use of paper in the office, how we consume information, all that's changing. And organizations, I refer to this as when-then, not if-then. They're not prepared for it. They haven't thought about it. If this happens, then we'll do this. It's when this happens, then we'll think about what it is we have to do. And the consequence of all that really rests with individuals, all of you as individuals. No matter what organization you're working in, how they are prepared for change and how they are addressing the changes in the world is going to have a great deal of impact on how you feel in terms of your contribution as an individual in society and the kind of rewards you can expect from the success of the organization that you're working in. So these are all important. Looking at the assumptions that get broken by change is where you turn this from a consequence to an opportunity to innovate. And, I just have just a few blurbs here. There's nothing, earth-shattering here. But as you look at change and you look at things that are no longer true, the assumptions are no longer valid, or something has come along to make the assumption much weaker than it was before. Whether Apple will own, the pad market, I think is a current question, right? If you look at the tablet computing and what they've done with the iPad is really extraordinary. But what are the assumptions about why it's successful? And so many of the other players here have just come out with what they can without really getting it. And I think that's one of the things that really distinguishes Apple is they get it. They get why you think the iPad is as cool as it is, the touch, the feel, how you experience the access to information. So really identifying the assets that you have as an individual and as an organization, and how you can respond to those changes, and where they are. What are the other things that are going to be needed in order to be able to not just respond to the change, but to drive the change, to be actually drive it faster, to be there first. It's an important concept, and I'll try and get through this in the next few minutes. From my perspective, there is no innovation that's successful unless it's broadly adopted. The iPad, I think, is a great example of that. The numbers for Motorola's Zoom came out today, and they'd sold 150,000 in the first month. iPad 2 sold 300,000 the first day. So you're looking at degrees of innovation that are really driven to success by adoption. And a lot of the challenge here that is hard to comprehend, and it's going to be incumbent upon all you to figure this out as you go out, is that you have this skill set from the discipline that you're all here to develop, but how that integrates into the broader organization, both on the business side and on the interpersonal, social side, all require you to be much better rounded individuals than certainly I was when I came out of school 4 years ago. So the ability to be able to think through from all these different perspectives, whether you're an end user of your organization's product, or you're the customer of the end user of your customer product, to think all through the value chain about how does what you're doing factor. Is it important or not important? If it's important, why is it important? How is it important? How is it more or less important than other aspects of use? So these are really important things to consider when you want to understand how to be successful. So I'm going to run through very quickly, because I want to leave room for questions. Many of you may have seen this. What I want to do is just take 3 big areas that I think are vastly important, and just think about innovation in that space a little bit from an engineering perspective. How many of you have seen this before? So this is some work they did over at Lawrence Livermore, and it looks at all the various sources of energy, and it looks at where it goes in terms of personal use, industrial use. And the shocking thing here is that we waste more energy than we use through the inefficiencies of the process, the inefficiencies of the distribution to the customer, and the efficiency of the equipment. I mean, more energy is wasted than we use. Just incredible. It's stunning. So, how do you think about that? So you think about the grid, and the grid is kind of structured and for, what's going to be the peak use. The peak use, and that's the capacity of all the utilities when they go about building a power plant. So if you can think about normalizing that and having, broad-based storage in the grid to be able to accommodate the peaks of use, it changes the game. Changes the game tremendously. And obviously, as we look at, and we think about batteries storing electricity as a more efficient use of energy than fossil fuels, which it is, then you come up with everything here. I sort of look at, there's materials challenges. There's, what kind of structures are you going to make for these batteries? How are you going to be able to monitor performance and be able to enhance the performance? Do you drain the battery all the way, or 90% of the way, or 50% of the way? And different structures, different systems all have different kinds of constraints and advantages, disadvantages that you have to understand. So, everything from graphene and being able to pattern materials with lasers, being able to think about different combinations of conductive and dielectric materials, and then thinking about how you array all those. There are tremendous challenges in there, and a great place for engineers to make a huge difference. Same thing's true for renewables, and what you see, the ability to be able to finally appreciate what nanosolar is trying to do, which is using not just different materials, whether it's carbon nanotubes or silicon microwires, but to be able to use different materials on a flexible substrate that allows you to do roll-to-roll manufacturing of solar cells. You're talking about a factor of 10 in terms of the cost of being able to manufacture these, which makes a huge difference in their viability in terms of return. So lots of materials problems, lots of process problems, lots of other applications for flexible displays, flexible sensors. And one project we were working on for the government, just this huge flexible, like the St. Louis Arch. The boats would go through, and you'd be able to use X-rays to be able to detect what was on board these boats. I mean, that's wild, but I mean, the possibilities for how you can use this kind of technology in other applications is really important to consider. And then you're talking about the grid system itself, and then being able to think about different materials. Think about being able to use constraint modeling to optimize demand response, being able to use simulation to be able to understand. All of this is kind of new to the grid. I mean, if you look at public utilities, I can't. I'd be here for hours talking about what you learn about public utilities, and any public utility, not just energy or electricity. All of these municipalities have all made independent decisions. There are not two DC transformers alike in all the public utilities across this country. So there's all of this randomness that's out there that needs to get comprehended somehow, and that's not going to be done in hardware. It's obviously going to have to be done in software until we get to that retrofit or that refurbishing of the grid. This is a slide I used to use at PARC, and it's one I'm proud of because we had actual projects in each of these areas. We're actually working with a startup to optimize energy usage in government data centers using the constraint-based modeling that I referred to earlier. In addition to the Sol Focus, which is a solar concentrator company, we're using different kinds of materials processes and different kinds of materials, nanostructures, in order to build very high efficiency kinds of solar cells. Clean water. This was one of my favorites, one of PARC's big bets. It's a very elegant, simple curve that uses one ordinate of fluidic forces in order to isolate particles suspended, even buoyant particles suspended, neutrally buoyant particles suspended in a fluid stream, and be able to isolate them to one side of the channel, and then you can shunt them off either for more concentrated side or shunt off the other side for a more diluted concentration. And so the application of this for clean water, chemical processes, and a whole host of other things is something that I think is really important and really significant. And lastly, looking at alternative fuel, CO2 extraction, and looking at extracting CO2 from seawater, from the air. Being able to take entrapped CO2 and be able to combine it with hydrocarbons and produce renewable liquid fuels. This is a project that PARC has been doing for the U.S. government. Obviously, the U.S. Navy would like to have the ability to do this from seawater on their aircraft carriers to refuel their planes. So we're at that early stage there where you can see that this notion of renewable fuels is possible, and working on some of the fundamental problems is a place that all of you can make a huge difference. The last area I want to talk about is healthcare. I referred earlier This is 1950. This is estimated in 2030. And this is age from, being born to not being alive anymore up at the top. And you can see what happens. And the burden for what's happening on the right is going to fall to all of you, because you're going to be the productive people who are supporting all those people who are no longer working. That's a huge challenge in many respects, at the individual level and also at the social level. This you can't see, but there's the United States. These are a whole bunch of other countries, down to, I think, Turkey is the one here at the bottom. This is a percent of GDP spent on healthcare. So you can see that there's something wrong with how we're providing healthcare, and there's a lot that can be done from a technology perspective to impact that. And this is just, again, looking at the fact that over time, over this 50-year period that we're referring to, the costs of healthcare have increased by a factor of 3. So it's in that magnitude that we were talking about earlier in terms of, from 3x to 6 or 7x, so big changes over a relatively short period of time. So 3 areas I think innovation can be addressed to help deal with this issue. Conquering it's going to be a long-term problem, and when the government is involved, as you can see, it's going to just make it longer. But if you look at medical devices, one of the things that distinguishes Silicon Valley, it could also be called Medical Device Valley as well. The number of firms that operate here and producing different kinds of devices, from labs on a chip to being able to have intelligent drug dispensing that's injected into the body, cochlear implants that you see there. There's a lot of innovation in the structures for these, the microstructures, even nanostructures for some of these devices. How you are able to deliver these at a system level. So being able to integrate functionality, including software, into devices that will be implanted into the body. And then just the use. There are very few forces more powerful in the world than the human body's immune system trying to attack things that don't belong there. So you end up with a lot of devices that simply don't withstand the human body's immune system and fail. On the software, this is primarily software, is that you look at the capacity of all this computation that we talked about earlier. It really changes the game in terms of how you think about the provision of healthcare. Most hospitals, Kaiser is one of the few, Kaiser is really a leader in this, they have no best practices. It's whatever your doctor kind of thinks is the best thing to do. There's very little reliance on real facts, real data, when a doctor makes a diagnosis and when he prescribes some therapeutic approach to the condition. None. That's scary. So if you look at the role of analytics, of systems intelligence, being able to help provide better quality care, faster, more consistent, and then the ability to be able to look at using a lot of the technology that we have now, being able to do diagnostics with the technology and being able to provide better diagnoses is really important. And then robotics. I think one of the tragic consequences of the wars in near Asia has to do with the injuries that a lot of the warfighters suffer as a consequence of IEDs and the nature of the war being fought there. It's not just about artificial limbs when I talk about robotics, but it's part of this whole ecosystem of being able to use artificial intelligence embedded in intelligent hardware to be able to actually perform surgery remotely. It's being done. And so as you think about the innovative possibilities here, they're really huge. This is one that actually goes through the body and actually injects cancer into remote sites in the body that are hard to get at through surgical techniques. So that was just kind of a quick view. what I want to prepare you for is the fact that if you look at the view of the world, company view of the world, market view of the world, if you look at how incumbents think about what they do and how innovators think about what they do, they're very different. And I want you all to focus on the right side. I want you all to think about what you all can do to think differently and to really look at the world as an independent thinker and assess what you learn against your own value system and be able to make decisions. I don't have enough time to go through this, but these are just simple 2x2s, high-low. I'm assuming these slides will be available so you can have a chuckle or two at some of these. What I want to go back to and what I want to conclude on really is this notion of innovation leadership. If you look at surveys that have been done and you talk to the management of many Fortune 500 companies and they say, well, what's the source of the gap you have? Why aren't you more innovative? They say, well, it's our people. And if you talk to the people in the organization, they go, there's no culture. There's no culture for innovation that is enabled or supported or allowed by management. So there's this conflict again that we have that needs to be broached. You need to be able to have, as you think about where you want to work, the two aspects I'm trying to communicate today is think about the kind of impact you can have through the innovation that you contribute to, and then also think about the culture that you're operating in, and is it going to allow you to be successful as an innovator? Is it going to help you grow and give you the kind of support and nurturing environment that you need? Leadership, again, as I said earlier, it's an individual choice. It's not one that you relegate to managers or superiors. It's something that you have to own as a testimony to what your purpose is in this life, and those are the connections you need to make. This is it. I think you all are incredibly important to Silicon Valley, to the United States, or whatever countries you may return to. This is really important. And I want you all to think deeply about the opportunities you have when you leave here, and make sure that you are agents for change through your own personal leadership through that kind of action. So that's what I have. This wasn't a technical talk. Come back and I'd be happy to talk about any one of these areas in technical terms, but this isn't a canned talk. So this is one that I wanted to put together that hopefully gives you some insight into how important innovation is and how important your role in fostering innovation is. So I can tell you some really funny stories about PARC. Yeah.
Yes, when you talk about innovation, what can you say about innovation in teaching?
In teaching?
Right, in the education system in our country.
Yeah, I didn't put it up there, but it's one of those big challenges that we have. I think part of the problem is that, and I'm not going to get into the tenure issue. I think that is an issue. I think that if you look at the efficacy of teaching, that somehow has to come into play. But if you look at the role of technology in teaching, I think what we are entering into now is a period where there's a more intelligent integration of technology in the delivery of the information in the curriculum, as opposed to just forced vias for learning. In other words, you went and you did your computer lab, and I'm speaking because I've got children from high school to third grade, so I've seen what goes on. And if you really think about the role of the teacher, it really is about a facilitator enabling children to be able to learn on their own. It's the same thing that hopefully you're getting as you go through higher education, it's teaching you how to learn. It's not only what you get in the classroom that comprises what you know. And so I think that the nature of teaching is not about getting good test scores at the end of the year as a measure of how effective you are as a teacher, but there needs to be a more personal commitment by the teacher to the individual to help them learn how to learn. Does that answer your question? Big problem. Okay, thanks.